I'm Michael Cockerell, and I've spent years unmasking our leaders, interviewing and profiling the great and the good, and sometimes the not so good, of British politics for BBC TV. I've made films about many prime ministers, and others who were the best prime ministers we never had. And here, I'm looking back on my film on Roy Jenkins, the fascinating man who revolutionised the social life of Britain. It was interesting making the film about Roy. When he was made the youngest Home Secretary of the century, homosexual law was reformed, divorce law was reformed, abortion law was reformed, hanging was banned. Britain of today owes a great deal in terms of social terms to the changes that he brought in.
Most people who have seized an opportunity to become Prime Minister have had this streak of almost obsessive ruthlessness. And I don't think I quite had that. I think perhaps I had slightly too many other interests.
Would Roy have been a good Prime Minister? He was very good at the various ministerial jobs that he had, and he was quick-witted, and he was a very good platform speaker, and he relished the use of the English language. But I think he would have found being Prime Minister quite difficult. I mean, everyone does, but he possibly more than many, because he was a precision man. Roy, as the film shows, he starts the day, 7 o'clock in the morning, doing a walk for 45 minutes around his tennis court in what he called an elaborate series of zigzags.
Now, I can do a more complicated manoeuvre. We ought to turn round, of course, a elaborate pattern I've worked out. You can turn left, so.
He counted the minutes every day there was, and never should there be an idle minute. One of his civil servants once told me that Roy was the only minister he'd ever had who knew how long it would take for the main traffic light in the major cities of Britain to change. He was also a sort of train spotter as well, and would swap train timetables from the 19th century with Harold Wilson, who was a bit the same. And during the war, Roy Jenkins worked at Bletchley Park as a code breaker. And I said, did the fact that you were a fascinated mathematician help you in breaking the codes? He said, I wasn't a mathematician. I was an arithmetician. You had to get your language right with Roy. I'd always wanted to do a film about Roy Jenkins. I'd known Roy Jenkins for a very long time. In fact, the first time I met Roy Jenkins, I was 14. He was, 30 or something like that. A number of Labour MPs were playing a game of cricket, and they roped me in. There's a picture of me, and I'm the only one in white, age 14, and all the other prominent Labour MPs, who included Bill Rogers, Roy, were all in grey trousers. Roy Jenkins, as I remember, was a rather good left-arm bowler. And it turned out, I hadn't realised at the time, that it was at a cricket match he first met his wife-to-be in 1940.
I remember seeing this rather handsome young man playing cricket, and within 2 or 3 days we were talking to each other and went away. At the end of the week we left together. I just think he's been, and always has been, the most engaging companion I've ever known. I mean, many other attractions too, but just to be with, it's always been better to be with him than to be with anybody else.
When we were making the film about Roy, we discovered, to our surprise, that he had had a number of love affairs. He was, on the surface, very happily married. But Roy had an interesting view that if you have a good, strong marriage and the person you want to have a love affair with is always very fond of Jennifer, then it'll be all right. I remember thinking, if I were Roy Jenkins, the biographer, and he was a famous biographer of Churchill and Gladstone, many other people, had found something like this, that Roy had serial love affairs, often with the wives of his best friends, would he have put it in his biography? And I thought, yes, of course he would.
And there was no doubting that Jenkins took pleasure in the company of glamorous and aristocratic women. He was a close friend of Jackie Kennedy, and he had a love affair with Jackie's sister, Princess Lee Radziwill. It was one of a number of love affairs that Jenkins had over the years, sometimes with the wives of friends. Yet remarkably, they didn't destroy his marriage, and both Roy and Jennifer Jenkins managed to remain friends with both husbands and wives. A lot of your friends have talked about the love affairs that you've had. I wondered why you didn't put that in your autobiography.
I wouldn't have wished to do so.
I mean, were you ever concerned as a politician that they might be found out about?
No, I don't think I've done things I'm ashamed of.
I think in some ways he rather liked the fact that he was now portrayed as a serial swordsman. He was 70 by then. The Daily Mail, for instance, said that one of Roy's lovers, Princess Lee Radziwill, the sister of Jackie Kennedy, had also had an affair with Mick Jagger. What do the two of them have? So there was quite a lot of good early publicity for this film. It was a kind of surreal time, really. When we'd finished making the film, we said he could see the film before it went out, because the Times had asked him to write a piece about what it was like, me making a film about him. And we sent a copy of the film to Roy, which he watched. His wife didn't know what the contents of the film would be, or the story about the love life. And she knew all about the affairs, but to know about the affairs privately is rather different from having it blazoned over all the papers. And she apparently wanted us to cut all that out. My producer, Alison Kahn, said to Jennifer Jenkins, but was it true? Was it true? And Jennifer wouldn't commit herself. And Alison said, look, we're not going to put out something if it's wrong. If you tell me it's not the case, then we'll do something about it. And she wouldn't. She wouldn't.
He has many disadvantages, I can tell you, as a husband. But one of the things he does not do and will never do is to say something he doesn't believe in.
It was suggested that we made changes. We didn't make any changes at all in the film.
And what does he mean by the weaknesses of the flesh by which you might seem to be tempted?
Drink, food, pleasure, perhaps. Just pleasure generally. Pleasure is not a bad thing.
He said to me that in a way, the most important thing in life is pleasure. Pleasure. And it can be pleasure of drink, it can be pleasure of other people's conversation, pleasure of books. Pleasure. Not a bad thing, pleasure. He also was clearly attracted to the rich upper class, but normally to that section of the rich upper class who were like him of liberal outlook. He says, I'm sometimes seen as a Whig. No, I'm a liberal. He was liberal all the time. He was a Labour MP until he effectively joined with the Liberals with the creation of the Social Democratic Party. But that's what the film was about, a very social democrat. He would have these extraordinary lunches with very prominent people there, and a lot of drink was consumed. You would never go to a Roy Jenkins lunch with a bottle of Plonk. He loved his claret.
If you think back to the position in this country 30 years ago, in which I was around, but you weren't around.
Now, where did he get this extraordinary voice from? Roy Jenkins had a background that any potential Labour leader wanted. His father was the leader of the miners' union in Wales. And so he came from a proper working class background. And when he went to Oxford, it was said that on his first day at Balliol College, Oxford, he went into the loo with a Welsh accent and came out speaking like a toff and not being able to pronounce his R's.
Oh, well, that's a sort of semi-physical, doesn't make me deficiency. I'm not claiming sympathy for it. A whole variety of people have not been able to pronounce their R's very ruggedly. Ruggedly is perhaps a word I oughtn't to use too much.
I remember we were filming during the 1975 referendum as to whether we should stay in the European Common Market or not. And the Labour Party was split down the middle about whether we should stay in or come out. And I interviewed Roy in 1975 about this, and I said to him, how damaging do you think this referendum will be for the unity of the Labour government, the Labour cabinet? And he said, I really do hope that this whole referendum campaign can be conducted without any wanker on either side. It's probably a word that he never knew.
God, I can't think what I'm going to say to that.
In a way, most politicians are quite happy to share some things, as long as they don't think they're going to be stitched up. And I try never to use the techniques of television against people. What I'm always looking for is to get beyond the public persona. And I'm lucky enough to film them for some time and take them to various places and show them films of themselves and they react to. And I think a number of politicians like the idea. The Daily Telegraph, Andrew Marr, wrote that you're no one in British politics until you've been cockerelled. I thought that was a lovely thing. And when I came to do an interview with Roy, again after the big film had gone out, he said, I'm feeling well disposed to you today because of what Andrew Marr has said. I said, I think that being cockerelled is probably above Desert Island Disc and below a knighthood. Because he needed to get absolute gradations right. Roy, in the end, said to me, I was quite upset because Jennifer was so upset, but I've had so many letters from friends and enemies and Conservatives saying how well Jennifer and I came over in the film that I think it was rather a great success. No one's ever heard any of that before.